Hi everyone, this side is Dr.M.Wasi Baig, Bilaal Alig, and the topic of my today's lecture is the manners and etiquettes in the light of Holy Quran. As we know that according to the Muslim belief and Islamic scholar account, the revelation of Quran began in 610 AD and when Angel Jibreel appeared to Prophet Muhammad in the Ghar Hira near Makkah, reciting to him the first verses of Quran, Iqra. So now I would like to share some verses and quotations of Holy Quran which indicate the manners and etiquette. In chapter 49 verses 11, the Quran says that don't insult, and in chapter 17 and verses 26, Quran says don't waste in the form of food, in the form of time and all. Similarly, in chapter 22 verses 36, Quran says feed the poor, and in chapter 5 verses 89, Quran says keep your oath, means promise is very important. And similarly, in chapter 27 and verses 36, Quran says don't take the bribe. And similarly, in chapter 9 chapter 9 and verses 4, Quran says that honor your treaties. And in chapter 3 verses 134, Quran says that restrain your anger. And similarly, in chapter 24 verses 15, Quran says don't spread gossip. And another verses in chapter 24 verses 12, Quran says think good of other. Similarly, the chapter 51 and verses 24 to 27, Quran says be good to a guest. And in chapter 33 verses 58, Quran says don't harm believers. And in chapter 17 and verses 23, Quran says turn away from ill speeches. And in chapter 49 verses 11, Quran says don't make fun of other. And in chapter 25 verses 63, Quran says walk in humble manner. And in chapter 41 and verses 34, the Quran says response to the evil with good. And similarly, in chapter 41 and verses 34, Quran says response to the evil with good. And in chapter 62 and verses 2, Quran says don't say what you don't do. In chapter 23 verse 8, Quran says keep your trusts and promises. In chapter 6 verses 108, Quran says don't insult others' false god. This quotation is very important in previous scenario. Similarly, in chapter 6 verses 152, Quran says don't deceive people in trade. And in chapter 3 verses 162, Quran says don't take items without rights. In chapter 5 verses 101, Quran says don't ask unnecessary questions. In chapter 25 verses 67, Quran says don't be miser. In chapter 49 verses 11, Quran says don't call others with bad names. And in chapter 53 verses 32, Quran says don't claim yourselves to be pure. And in chapter 25 verses 63, Quran says speak nicely even to the ignorant. In chapter 76 and verses 9, Quran says don't ask for repayment for favor. In chapter 58 verses 11, Quran says make room for others at gathering. And in chapter 8 verses 61, Quran says if enemy want peace, then accept it. This is also a very important quotation in present scenario. And similarly, in a quotation which shows that written a greeting in better manner, that is chapter 4 and verses 86. And chapter in chapter 2 verses 264, Quran says, don't remind other of the favor you done to them. So here I just share the quotations of Holy Quran which shows the manners and etiquettes of manners and etiquette in the light of Holy Quran. This is my humble request to you. Please like, share and comment my YouTube channel, Dr. Baig. Thanks a lot for your cooperation. Thank you very much.